Hey everybody, welcome back, or if you're new to my channel, thanks so much for tuning in. So today I thought I'd make a video making some keto snacks. So, I think sometimes we just get in real ruts with our meal ideas, and I think the same goes for snacks. So today's video is kind of inspired because I'm getting ready to go on a road trip, and I thought it'd be nice to have some, good healthy snacks to choose from, because sometimes I have a tendency to want to grab, a bag of Cheetos or something that's not a very good option just to keep me awake. So I did a little homework and looked up some different keto snacks, and I actually decided to go back to my old tried and true recipes and just make some substitutions with them. So all three recipes that I'm going to be doing today are old recipes, but they were yummy, so I'm just going to alter them very slightly and then they'll be good to go as keto. I'm going to do chili cheese bites, and these are great to just cut up and serve as hors d'oeuvres or like bring with you, or maybe for breakfast. They're really versatile, but I'm going to alter it very slightly by using almond flour and coconut flour instead of regular flour. If I'm going to be true keto, I'm going to use cream of tartar and baking soda to make my own baking powder, because apparently baking powder is a no-no on the keto diet. But both of those things are super simple. The whole recipe is really easy and they're really yummy. So let's get started. I want to get started with the substitutions first, because I think that'll just make it a lot less confusing to follow the recipe. So the first substitution we're going to do is for keto baking powder. So we're going to use 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and then we're going to use 2 teaspoons of cream of tartar, and that's it. That's our keto baking powder. And I looked this up and I can link this down below if you want. Super simple, and if you really want to be true to keto, then that's what you're supposed to do, I guess. Okay, so that's our baking powder, and we're going to set that aside. So our next substitution is going to be coconut flour and almond flour. I'm going to half and half it, and that will replace the regular flour. And this recipe doesn't even call for a lot of regular flour, so I don't think it's going to change the taste too terribly much. This recipe calls for a half a cup of regular flour, so I'm going to do half coconut, half almond. So I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of almond flour, and then I'm going to do a 1/4 cup of coconut flour. Okay. And that's it. Those are the only substitutions I needed to make, and how easy was that? And now we'll get started on the recipe. Okay, so I should have mentioned this makes a 9x13 pan, and I'm going to link the recipe down below. The recipe calls for 8 tablespoons of butter. You're going to melt butter in the bottom of the pan. We're going to pop it into the 400-degree oven, and it's going to melt, and then we'll coat the pan. Okay, so I melted the other half of the butter. 4 tablespoons is in the pan, and this is the other 4 tablespoons. And I'm just going to let it cool a little bit, because you're supposed to add it to the eggs, and I don't want to scramble the eggs or anything. So I'm going to do 10 eggs in a large bowl. Okay, so now we're going to beat the eggs. It's 10 eggs, so you want to make sure that you're really getting them well blended. Okay, so now we're going to add our substitution for baking powder, or keto baking powder, and we're going to add 1 teaspoon. You can make a larger batch of this if you want and just put it in a little jar with a lid, and I'm sure it would save, I don't know, why not, maybe a couple months. And then our substituted flour. Dash of salt. Okay, now this is real well blended, and I'm going to add my kind of cooled off melted butter. That's about half a cup. There's a whole stick in this recipe. So nice, smooth consistency now. At first it was a little lumpy, but that butter kind of helps it blend. We're going to set this aside now. We're going to do our cheeses. What makes it really light and fluffy is the cottage cheese. So we're going to do 2 cups of cottage cheese. 1. There's 2. Now I got pepper jack, and I also got Colby jack, but you could just use plain jack. So it calls for 4 cups. Okay, that's 2 cups. I've added 2 cups and I'm going to stir this around before I add the next 2 cups. But I'm going to pour it in here so I don't forget. I'm just blending this first 2 cups before I add the other 2 cups. I just think it's going to be a little easier that way. Other 2 cups. If you like cheese, this is a good recipe for you. Lots of protein. Great keto recipe. And the rest of the cheese. Then we're going to add 2 cans of the chopped green chilies. Now sometimes at this point, maybe you don't like green chilies, maybe you'd rather add like some crumbled up bacon or something. You can get, you know, the already crumbled bacon. And then it would be a little bit more like quiche Lorraine maybe. We're just going to mix this really well. Okay, then we're going to carefully add our cottage cheese mixture to our egg mixture. Just make sure that this is blended really well and that there aren't any more soupy areas. So don't forget that step of coating your pan with half of the butter, because that's what's going to give it that nice crunchy outside. Not crunchy, but crispy. So I'm going to put this in a 400-degree oven and set the timer for 15 minutes. And then at that time, we're going to turn it down to 350 for about 30 to 35 minutes. So easy. Okay, so for our second recipe, another old recipe. My mom came up with this, and she cooked it with my son when he was like, I don't know, 6 or something. So it's a family recipe, and again, I'm just altering it very slightly to make it keto. Again, there are only 2 slight substitutions, same as before, the flour and the keto baking powder mix. So with the flour, I did half almond flour and half coconut flour, which I prefer over all of one or all of the other, because sometimes coconut flour can end up a little bit mealy or pasty, so I like to mix them. So we'll get started. So this is the almond flour and coconut flour, and it is a cup of that. Our baking powder mix, we want a half a teaspoon of that. And we'll mix that. And that's it. That was just, that's the substitutions. It really doesn't make it that much more complicated at all. Then we're going to do a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper to give it a little kick. And we'll just mix that again. And I'm guessing they don't call for any salt in this recipe because the green olives are plenty salty on their own. So the next thing is 1 cup of cheddar. This is what I had. It's just a blend, but cheddar might be good, just cheddar. Mix that. Okay, and then it calls for a 1/4 cup of butter softened. It doesn't say melted, so I just softened it. And 1 egg just to moisten the pretty dry mixture. And we're going to blend that together. To make sure you mash that butter in and get it really well mixed with the flour. It becomes like a dough, a little bit of a dry dough. And if it's too dry, you know, you can just add a couple teaspoons of water, a little bit at a time. Smell those chili cheese bites. Yum. So this has got the flour, the baking powder, the cayenne, cheddar cheese, butter, and egg, and a little bit of water. So you just want to make sure that these olives are nice and dry or the dough won't stick. And as soon as those chili cheese bites come out, in about 5 minutes, I'm going to turn the oven back up to 400 to pop these in. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my cookie scoop, and I'm going to, not completely full, but just enough so I can pop the olive down in there. See? And then we're going to pop it out. There you go. I guess that's why they're called olive poppers. So you have to have these nice big olives. You know, you could do this with your hand. I think this turns out really nice. So I wouldn't pack this super tight, otherwise you're not going to be able to shove the olive down in the center. So just like that. And then there you go. You could even maybe spray this with a little olive oil. That might help so that the dough doesn't stick. This is a really easy recipe, and it's great to have, you know, at a party or holiday or something like that. But I like them just, you know, to grab as a snack too. I love olives though. So I just took the chili cheese bites out of the oven, and I'm gonna let them cool before I cut them. So we're gonna pop these in the oven at 400 degrees for 15 minutes. Okay, so for the third recipe, of course we have to have something sweet. So another old recipe, magnificent macaroons. There's really only two things that I'm doing different from this recipe. There's very few ingredients in the first place. This calls for sweetened condensed milk, so I'm gonna make my own keto version, and I'll show you. And then the other substitution are my chocolate chips. For keto, maybe you wanna go and find some chocolate chips that are made with a sugar substitute. But for me, I just got the really dark chocolate. Still has a little sugar in there, but if you don't want the sugar, just look for those other ones. I'm sure they have them at Sprouts or maybe at a specialty store. So we're gonna get started on the keto version of sweetened condensed milk. So we're over here at the stove, and we're gonna start making our keto version of the sweetened condensed milk. And so far, I've added the whipping cream, heavy whipping cream. I just got this at Trader Joe's. It's so handy to have on hand. But when you do this, you want to make sure you get all that thick stuff out of the bottom. So I opened it up because you want to make sure you get all of that thick stuff, because you know you need this to be thick. This is 8 ounces, and we're going to do 1 tablespoon of butter. I'm going to start the heat. And then I found this, I got this at Walmart actually. This is Swerve, and it's like a confectioner sugar replacement. I'm gonna do 1/3 of that. Okay, so we're just gonna make sure that this is real well blended. So I have this on a fairly high heat, but I'm stirring it continuously. And then as soon as it starts to come to a boil, I'm gonna turn the heat down and simmer it for 15-20 minutes, and just until it's nice and thick. Okay, so it's coming to a nice rolling boil, and we're going to turn that temperature down now and let it simmer. A little slow. I've already made the sweetened condensed milk, and it's chilling so that it doesn't melt the chocolate chips when I add it to the mix. And so now we'll get started on the rest. So this is 2 egg whites that I'm going to beat until they are stiff. I think that is definitely stiff. Then we're going to add this to our bowl. Wow, look at that. And then I've got 14 ounces of shredded coconut. Now, this, you know, some recipes call for the sweetened coconut, but I'm going to do it with unsweetened. But I'm going to gently fold into this. It's like mixing air. Okay, so that I made the sweetened condensed milk, and then I chilled it, which made it nice and thick, as you see. It turns out that recipe is exactly how much I needed for this recipe, so perfect. 3/4 of a cup. By the way, this sweetened condensed milk is delicious. It's so, so good. So you could substitute this in so many different recipes. I can tell you how good it is. I'm going to link all these recipes below, including the substitutions that I've used. Then we're going to stir in 1.5 cups of our chocolate morsels. Oh, it's a little warm. Okay, so my condensed milk was still a little too warm. As you see, it melted my chocolate a little. So make sure, I don't think it's going to affect the flavor at all, but make sure if you want them to have that white coconut look with the dark chocolate chips, then make sure you let it cool all the way. I was a little impatient. Then I've lined a cookie sheet with parchment paper, which I also did on the olive poppers. The parchment paper works so well. These still look yummy to me. Okay guys, so here are the 3 completed recipes. We've got your chili cheese bites. These would be really great, maybe with some sour cream or guacamole. You can serve them at a holiday, or like I'm gonna do for, some protein in the morning if you wanna get going and get on the road. Then you've got your cheddar olive poppers here, nice little salty, cheesy treat. And the chocolate macaroons. Now these, I'm a little disappointed because I didn't wait for the sweetened condensed milk to get cool enough, and they looked a little brown, but that's okay. They're gonna be yummy. Well, I'm very curious if any of you have some old recipes that maybe you wanna transform into a keto recipe. I'd love to know how you're gonna do it and which recipes you'll use. So please list those in the comments below. And as always, I really appreciate you taking some of your time to spend with me today, and I hope that these recipes will work out for you. And if you like this video, please don't forget to click like and subscribe. Thanks a lot. See you guys soon.